We have a new schedule out. It's up on the counter there. Uh, uh, and most of you are familiar faces, so you've been here. We've talked a lot about the various battles, and we're trying to do this throughout the whole year, which means we're going chronologically. It would have been nice to do something on the Declaration around the 4th, and we will, we'll cover it again during that period. But we're up to July of 1776. We last talked about uh, Evacuation Day. Was that the last topic?
Today is the anniversary.
Tomorrow is the anniversary. Today's the birthday of James Madison. Um, so I'm going to talk a few minutes. This is more lecture-ish, I guess. We're not talking about wars and stuff. So I was thinking the whole time as I was preparing the last couple of days, this is kind of boring. And then I got into it, and it's really not boring. The more you get into it, because you hear about all the battles taking place, but all that's going on. There's these guys, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. They're all trying to figure things out. Ben Franklin, and they're all sitting there making plans and doing things. So by early 1776, the colonies have been fighting Britain for many, many years. The first battle, of course, Lexington and Concord. We talked about that in April of 75. 2 months later, June of 75, Bunker Hill. We talked about around the same time as Bunker Hill, we have these guys over here, John Dickinson, sending a petition, an olive branch petition. We talked about that, saying, look, we have some problems here. We're looking for help. We don't want to declare independence. He said that we were all rebels. Every one of us were rebels, all Americans. He refused to read it. So we're up now till late 75. Washington had dispatched, we have the British under siege, the Army, Navy not so much, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the British Army was under siege and couldn't do anything. They were in Boston into the late 75. You get into 76, you got the turning point, some would say, in order to move it more towards independence, was Thomas Paine's Common Sense. We talked about that. Common Sense on January 10th sold 120,000 copies in a matter of weeks. Now you might say that's not a lot. Our population was only 2.5 million. So 120,000 copies sold in a couple of weeks was incredible. A couple provisions, a couple quick things. He said, "'Tis time to part." This is January 1776. Paine argued that reconciliation with Great Britain was impossible. And the only option we had at that point was independence. Thomas Paine wrote that even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families. Paine was using some strong language to criticize King George III for attacking the colonies. His point was that a country should not wage war against its own people. After the pamphlet spread, public opinion shifted rapidly toward independence. By the spring, within a couple of months, colonial assemblies began instructing their delegates to the Second Continental Congress to vote for independence. The first colony to instruct its delegates to support independence was, does anybody know? No? Pretty important one. Virginia. We'll talk about New York.
Some things don't change.
Yeah. So remember, we had the British armies under siege. Boston still had the British still had their navy who were sailing around, bombarding coastal towns. April and May, so we talked about evacuation day, March 17th, that's tomorrow. April, May, Washington's starting to, within a month of that, he shifts the Army away from Boston and heads to New York because he said the British are definitely coming back. They didn't leave for good. They all went to Nova Scotia, but the idea was they were definitely going to come back to New York because of the significance of that with the harbor. And by taking New York, they would be able to cut the north from the south. So it was pretty obvious. He shifted his army down there. It's April, May, and then in June. By June, the British had amassed 30,000 soldiers. We have not declared independence yet. They amassed 30,000 soldiers on Staten Island. In early July, they were filling the harbor with their ships. A full-scale war was imminent. All this was taking place while these guys that we'll talk about today were trying to put together a document to declare independence. And within weeks of the declaration, the British launched the New York, New Jersey campaign, which is the topic for next, is it next week?
Yes,
Is it?
the 20th, yeah, or whatever that is.
26th.
30th, 26th, whatever. 2 weeks from tonight.
So we're up to June 1776. On June 11th, Congress appointed a small committee of 5 guys. You have the list of those 5 guys. And this is some of the interesting stuff I learned as I was reading of, why these guys? We just assume stuff now, 250 years later. These guys were so intelligent to pick the proper people to do the drafting of the Declaration. They had to balance geographies. Remember, you're dealing with colonies, 13 of them, all of whom had different interests. You had to balance that. Because one thing was certain to these guys, and that is they had to get unanimity. It had to be unanimous. The 5 guys reflected a good skill mix. There were orators, writers, diplomats, practical guys. People who had political influence. Guys that were respected in Congress. And the ability to compromise. I'll talk about Jefferson last because he's the main guy everybody knows about. John Adams was a strong debater. He was an attorney. He's very experienced. He represented New England, which was, they were obviously very invested in independence. Ben Franklin, 70 years old, he was the elder statesman. He was respected internationally. He was very skilled at tact. If you ever saw anything about him, you wouldn't get that idea, but he knew what to say and when to say it. He wouldn't say it out of place. He represented Pennsylvania, which was another large, very influential colony. Roger Sherman represented Connecticut. By the way, he's the only guy that signed the Declaration, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. He's the only one that signed all 3. He was seen as a practical guy, someone who could bridge the regional differences that was definitely going to come about. Robert Livingston, New York. They were slow to support independence in New York. He was a young lawyer. He was politically active, but he could draft. He was known for his legal drafting abilities. He added balance from the middle colonies to help reach consensus. Interesting, he's one of the 5 guys on the committee. He never actually signed the final declaration. He was recalled by New York beforehand, so he never signed. Now to the man of the hour, Thomas Jefferson. He was chosen because he was considered by everybody as one of those guys. He's the best writer, he's the smartest, whatever. He was capable of producing a clear, persuasive argument. He represented Virginia, which was at the time the largest and most influential colony. And Adams actually took to his defense, walking around saying, you got to pick him. People were saying, no, John, you got to do it. And John said, quote, I'm obnoxious and unpopular, and Jefferson is not. That's what he said. So Jefferson it is. He wrote the entire draft between June 11th and June 28th, 17 days, in a rented room in Philadelphia. He drew from the Enlightenment thinkers. We talked about this last week. John Locke talks about natural rights. Government doesn't give you things. You have these rights. Montesquieu talks a lot about limits on government. And he drew a lot from George Mason's Declaration of Rights in Virginia. Before it was presented to Congress, he talked to two people to get some edits before presenting. Anybody know who those two people are? Pretty obvious. Franklin and Adams. That's right. The biggest change, let's talk about Franklin. The original line by Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. Franklin said you can't do that. That's too religious or emotional. He was a big believer in being appealed to reason as opposed to making anything about religion or making it emotional. Self-evident, it was a rational, enlightenment-friendly term. Another thing that Franklin did, by the way, records show that none of these were in writing. They were just sitting around and he was verbally talking and Jefferson's taking down notes and then making edits accordingly. Franklin would soften a lot of the harsh phrases. We'll go through the actual document, but Jefferson's initial draft had extremely strong condemnations of the king. I think the final had pretty strong condemnations, but his was even stronger. And he suggested toning down some language that just wasn't necessary. He wanted to keep the focus on the principles of that document and the grievances, not just personal attacks. Word flow. Jefferson had a tendency of having long, ongoing sentences. Franklin said, let's shorten those up and let's improve the flow. And what his position was, you know, in those days, persuading people, it was all about reading it aloud and people hearing and digesting it. And it was very, very important. Boom, boom, boom. So they rephrased a lot of what was written in order to be better, more readable, more listenable, whatever you want to say, more understandable to the people listening. And the big one, he suggested we got to take out a slavery passage. Thomas Jefferson, who owned slaves, by the way, was condemning the king in his original draft for perpetuating slavery. Franklin suggested we remove that. Basically, that would be a non-starter for the southern colonies. Jefferson was later said to be very, very upset about this particular change. John Adams, he's a lawyer. He wanted to strengthen the case for independence. He took some wishy-washiness out. Jefferson was hedging. There were certain things where he was, not committed on fully. He said he wanted to make it absolutely clear, Adams did, that reconciliation with Britain was no longer possible. He's the one that came up with the idea to list all the grievances in order, and then they discussed the order in which they should appear. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. He wanted to emphasize the collective commitment that they were undertaken. At the very end, you'll see highlighted in the Declaration, very end, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honors. That was Adams' edit. And Adams, like Franklin, preferred reasoned argument over religious, flowery language. Now, he was religious, but he knew that a lot of that would be just for show. So now it gets to the Congress on June 28th. So remember, the committee's appointed June 11th, 17 days. He drafts and goes through edits with Adams and Franklin. June 28th, they present it. On July 1st and July 2nd, there's a debate. July 2nd, they end up voting. Let's talk about how it started. On June 7th, going back to 4 days before they even appointed a committee, the process was started by what's called the Lee Resolution. Richard Henry Lee from Virginia resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. Hear, hear. Lee, oddly enough, made that resolution, started the process towards the Declaration of Independence, but he never actually voted. He did sign later, but after he made the resolution, his wife became very ill and he had to travel back to Virginia. Technically, we became independent on July 2nd. A lot of you know that, not July 4th. That's when the vote was. John Adams wrote to his wife, Abigail, "The second day of July will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, games, sports, guns, bonfires, and illuminations, from one end of the continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore." Well, he described the 4th of July very good, but he predicted it would be the 2nd. So they present to Congress the Declaration, drafted by Jefferson, with the edits now of Adams and Franklin. Congress ends up cutting 25%, about a quarter of it was cut. Jefferson complained that they mangled it. Complained afterwards that they maimed it. One of the biggest changes, life, liberty, and property became life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Property sounded too materialistic. They wanted it to appeal to all people, not just landowners. It could include things like personal fulfillment, well-being, liberty, not just possessions. Jefferson didn't quite take out the condemnation of slavery in the draft, so it made it. He's still pushing for it. Congress ended up removing it. Jefferson's clause basically was saying that Britain forced the colonies into maintaining a slave trade, and they blocked colonial attempts to restrict it, and the king incited enslaved people to revolt against colonists. This is the Dunmore Declaration, and Lord Dunmore in 1775, his proclamation promising freedom to enslaved people who joined the British. Why did Congress remove it? Pretty obvious. But most importantly, South Carolina and Georgia said no, 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 no. Even northern merchants, not the colonies, but the merchants were profiting from the transatlantic slave trade. And again, this couldn't be a 7-6 vote. It had to be unanimous. So out it went. The only vestige in the current document is a vague remnant accusing the king of exciting domestic insurrections among us. The final vote was 12 for independence. Great state of New York abstained. We didn't do it. We didn't vote. Because we did not, our delegates there did not have the authority to vote yet. They ultimately did vote for it on July 9th. So it didn't become unanimous until then. I didn't research this part, but in the declaration, which was printed on the night of the 4th, it said unanimous. But that was not unanimous of 13, it was unanimous of 12. The abstention didn't count.
That's actually something that I've been wondering, mostly because we have, printouts here. You said it was printed the night of the 4th.
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. Interesting, Jefferson was not a very quiet man, but he sat silent. People say he didn't say a word. He sat silent during the entire debate and just watched his then friend, John Adams, really go at it and pitch it. Talking about the signing and printing of it. Some interesting stuff here. The first printing was that night, July 4th, by Philadelphia printer John Dunlap. It's called the Dunlap Broadsides. About 200 copies were printed overnight. There's 26 today. They were distributed to colonial governments, military commanders, and newspapers. The Declaration itself wasn't signed, for the most part, until August 2nd. So the first printings by Dunlap were without the signatures. It simply said, by order of thing, it had John Hancock, who was the Secretary of the Congress, and someone else, but they weren't signed. And at the time, there was fear that by posting those names early, there would be immediate repercussions from the British. And I'm going to talk about that, what happened to some of these guys. So who signed it? 56 men signed it. All 13 colonies were represented. Does anybody know which colony had the most? Trivia question? No? Nobody? Pennsylvania had 9. Virginia had 7. The youngest was Edward Rutledge. He was only 26. The oldest, you could guess, was Ben Franklin. He was 70. Roughly 12 to 15, I don't know why they didn't have an actual number, but 12 to 15 were actually active in taking up arms and fighting or commanding. These are the guys who were signing the Declaration, but they were also at times fighting in the war itself. John Hancock signed first and largest. Legend has it that he signed it large enough so that the king could read it without his glasses. Everybody knows nowadays, put your John Hancock here, that's why. 2 future presidents signed it, Jefferson and Adams. Does anybody know about the strange historical coincidence involving Jefferson and Adams? Died on the same day? More coincidence than that.
Died on July 4th, 1825.
1826, on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration, these 2 guys died. I find that the most amazing coincidence ever. To be fair, I knew that before this, but that's all right. Adams' last words were, "Jefferson still survives." He didn't know that Jefferson died a few hours earlier. William Henry Harrison, the 9th president, was 3 years old when his father signed, Benjamin Harrison. Does anybody know if George Washington signed it?
No.
They don't know, or no, he didn't?
No, he didn't, but you already told us that, because he said 2 future presidents did.
Oh, see? There was a question whether he should sign it, but of course he was out busy at war. He was in New York at the time. There was a question whether or not they should recall him to come and sign it because it would have been significant. But then it was determined, probably very wisely, that someone in the military shouldn't sign a political document. You were blurring the lines between military and civil authority. Did any of the representatives refuse to sign? Anybody know that, Mr. Trivia?
No, I don't know.
The answer is yes. One little weasel, John Dickinson. He was afraid of treason. He was afraid of being declared treasonous. Now, in the years following, he did support in other ways, probably after it looked like we were going to do okay. I mentioned this earlier. At the end of the Declaration, they pledged, we mutually pledged to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And that wasn't just rhetoric. I'm telling you guys, you have to learn more about this, and you have to read about it. It'll become part of your life if you just learn what these guys did and what they risked. We see it on TV. We don't appreciate it. They were committing treason. They were committing treason by signing that document. Death by hanging. Franklin said during the debate, we must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately. Many signers suffered real loss. I'll talk a couple of them. Richard Stockton from New Jersey, signer. He was captured by British troops at his home in Princeton in late 1776. We'll go through that process of, New York, we escape, we go to, in Pennsylvania, we cross Trenton, down to Princeton. All during that time, the British Army was out looking for patriots and their families. And what did they start with? They started with the guys on the list, the guys who signed. Richard Stockton was imprisoned in New York, badly mistreated, so much so that he died 4 years later as a result. He had been released in late 1777. He was held for about a year. He was released on the condition that he ceased political activity. He didn't do that. He did not do that. He ended up dying a couple years later. Thomas Nelson of Virginia, while governor, he urged the American artillery to fire on his own house in Yorktown. His house was being used by the British during the siege of Yorktown, and his willingness to sacrifice his own property made him a symbol of personal dedication. Francis Lewis in New York, maybe the worst situation. His home and property was burned and looted by the British when they occupied Long Island. So you're talking within a month or so after the actual declaration. The British were told to specifically target prominent patriot families. They had loyalist families identify them. Francis Lewis was in Philadelphia with the Continental Congress. His wife was not. They captured his wife. She was imprisoned for several months, treated very, very harshly, almost died. Much of the family's wealth and possessions were destroyed. George Clymer and Robert Morris from Pennsylvania, they were key financiers of the war. They risked their personal fortunes to fund the Continental Army. Robert Morris later faced imprisonment for debts. When the Declaration was adopted, there were public readings. It was read aloud in town squares. After the Declaration was read to troops in New York City, you may have heard this, soldiers and citizens pulled down the statue of King George III, and they melted it down, and they turned it into 42,000 musket balls for the Continental Army. Correcting a myth, maybe there was a famous bell story. Tradition says the Liberty Bell rang to announce the reading in Philadelphia. I don't think that happened. most historians don't think it happened, that's why I don't, but I don't have any personal knowledge for it. The last thing I'm gonna go through about the declaration is to talk about the document itself, a couple of the provisions, and how they organized it. Obviously, as is the case with anything, you have the introduction. We know it as the preamble. And the purpose of that was to explain why we're doing this. Why are we making this crazy decision? In the course of human events, by the way, you can refer to that declaration there. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, blah, 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 blah. Nature entitled a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. This opening sets a respectful diplomatic tone. The colonists say that they owe the world an explanation for what they're doing, why they're breaking away. And it frames independence as something that sometimes becomes necessary. The phrase, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind, notes show that the document was aimed not just at Britain, but at potential allies like Spain and France. Secondly, was a statement of political philosophy, this natural rights we've been talking about. Explains the principles behind it. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And you know the rest of that provision. That was strongly influenced by John Locke. Governments exist to protect rights, not grant them. Power comes from the consent of the governed. The third part of the declaration is the list of grievances. This is the longest part of the document. The purpose, and this was important, John Adams pointed out, this is very important to basically show our evidence, to make the case. There are 27 grievances. They're directed at King George III personally. He has, specifically avoiding going after Parliament and making it direct to King George. By the end, the king appears as a tyrant responsible for systematic oppression. The first grievance, I highlighted all the ones I'm talking about. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. So in the British imperial system, I didn't know a lot about this stuff, but it's very interesting. In the British imperial system, colonial assemblies could pass laws locally, but many of those required royal approval to take effect. You can have your laws, but can't have effect until we approve it. The king or the royal governors could veto or delay them indefinitely. Colonists argue that this left them unable to govern themselves, and it showed that Britain was undermining representative government. Next provision, he has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation until his assent could be obtained. Royal governors, this is interesting, royal governors had the authority to suspend or totally dismiss an entire colonial government. In Virginia, the governor dissolved the House of Burgesses in 1765 after it passed a resolution against the Stamp Act. 4 years later, they did it again when they protested taxes on imported goods. 5 years after that, 1774, they dissolved the House of Burgesses again after it condemned Parliament's closure to the port of Boston. Colonial voices were being silenced and led to this belief that Britain sought to strip the colonies of the right to self-government. Next provision, obstructed administrative justice, establishing judiciary powers. You gotta remember, this was a different time. Colonies were frustrated by British interference in the legal system. The king controlled judicial appointments, ensuring that judges were loyal to the crown rather than the colonists. Fair justice was perceived as impossible. Sort of like when the Bills play Kansas City. You know. Yes. I didn't write that one down. That was off the top of my head. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without consent. So following the French and Indian War, Britain stationed 10,000 soldiers in the colonies. A force that was controlled by the crown, of course, not the elected representatives here. Maintaining this army was costly, and this cost caused Britain's war debt to increase taxes on Britain and the colonies. And it became a real question. Well, French are no longer a threat. Why do we still have a standing army here? What's going on? That's interesting. That's an interesting thing. Why are they raising taxes without representation? So there was really no need, unless they thought something was going to happen here.
I know they were also really upset about the Quartering Act.
Yeah,
That standing army.
yeah. I couldn't do all of them, Sean, but yes, I agree. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Britain was restricting colonial trade. There was a series of laws in the 1660s, 100 years prior, called the Navigation Acts. Now these rules had been only loosely enforced under what's known as salutary neglect. Basically, it was a law that was on the books, and they didn't enforce it. Britain did, from a law 100 years prior. While in the 1760s, they started tightening enforcement of them to raise revenue. And then later, punitive laws like the Boston Port Act closed the Boston Harbor. These measures symbolize Britain's attempt to control their economy, the colonial's economy. The big one everybody learns growing up as the main reason, imposing taxes on us without our consent. No taxation without representation. We had no representation in Parliament. Place yourself, 1775, before the Declaration, we're subjects of Britain. Essentially, we're Brits, whatever you want to say. And they had a Bill of Rights, the English Bill of Rights. In 1689 was their Bill of Rights. A big part of which talked about taxation, having to have the right to be represented. So I started thinking about that, and I thought, wait, that changes a little bit, because they were pursuing their grounds on the basis that, saying that Britain was violating their constitutional rights under the British Bill of Rights. Why is that fascinating? I don't know, but I was fascinated by that. It just provided a little bit more of a foundation for the argument, other than just yelling that they're taxing you without. Transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. The 1774 Intolerable Acts, targeting Massachusetts, which, as we know, was primarily a response to the Boston Tea Party, allowed anyone accused of crimes against officials that were carrying out the king's duties to be transported at the government's whim to England for trial. Adams decided to put this one towards the bottom, and it was the next two revision. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. It's one of the only provisions in there that I fully understood when I first read it. So what were they talking about? Some things that we kind of skipped over. Back in 1775, Lexington Concord, Bunker Hill, we had the standing army on the ground. The British were under siege in Boston, but their navy was not. And they had a strong-ass navy. They had the most powerful navy in the world. And they were traveling around bombarding towns. The burning of Falmouth occurred in October of 1775. This is what these guys are all thinking about when they're writing this document. This had happened. Captain Henry Mowat had several British warships. He issued a demand to the local patriots to surrender their arms and submit to the crown, or he will burn the place down. They refused. He burned it down. Hundreds of cannon shots over 9 hours. Over 400 buildings were destroyed. Most of the town burned. The event outraged colonists and became propaganda showing that Britain was waging war against its own civilians. January 1st of 76, burning of Norfolk. Norfolk at the time was one of the largest ports in Virginia. The British bombed it, destroyed much of the city. Other actions the British Navy were taking were seizing merchant ships, destroying ports and warehouses, as I mentioned, bombarding towns and interrupting trade. This is what Jefferson meant by, quote, plundered our seas and ravaged our coasts. In addition, there was destruction during early battles. We talked about this in the past. During the Battle of Bunker Hill, the British troops burned much of Charlestown. Colonists were seeing that as punishment against civilians rather than legitimate warfare. Jefferson's wording on this is deliberately dramatic. The rhythm of the sentence, in order: plundered, ravaged, burnt, destroyed. It's an example of rhetorical escalation, making each accusation feel worse than the last. And it was designed so that when it was read aloud, the audience would feel the emotional weight of it. The scariest part to a lot of common patriots, we're getting towards the end here, he is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny. He's referring to, Rick, you know, who's he referring to? Hessians. He's referring to the British hiring Hessians. And this was shocking to the colonists. Remember, they believe they're still subjects of Britain with rights. The Crown was using foreign soldiers. It felt like betrayal. And they were so determined to crush their liberty that he had to import foreign killers. What made it worse was that Americans at the time, propaganda portrayed the Hessians as brutal and ruthless, large figures, which made the grievance sound even more frightening to people. The last part of the Declaration says, well, here's what he did wrong, here's what he's doing wrong, and here's why we're doing it. And by the way, we attempted to reconcile. So they talk about that towards the end. And quote, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. Separation, then, is reluctant, but necessary. Remember, they wanted to show that they were not just reckless rebels. And remember, you had the Olive Branch petition, that whole thing. So, that's all I got in the Declaration. Hold on. We have a 10-minute thing coming up, and then Louis is going to talk, has a cool topic to talk about. Let's see how well you guys listen. Everybody but my son can answer this question, can answer these. Justin.
Which one?
Which colony abstained from the independence vote on July 2nd?
New York. Of course. Blame it on Hochul.
What was the name of the printer that produced the first copies overnight? Unlap. Which New York delegate helped draft the Declaration but never signed it? Robert Livingston, yes. Which member of Congress opposed declaring independence? Didn't sign it.
Dickinson?
Karen Fenn? Dickinson's the answer. John Dickinson. Enjoying this very much. Which future signer missed the final vote, but he did sign, but he started the whole thing. He introduced the motion for independence on June 7th. Who? Richie Lee. Richard Henry Lee. Is that Paulie? Who was that? Approximately how much was Jefferson's draft changed after, not including Adams and Franklin, but by Congress?
23%.
Yeah. There was a total of 86 edits, if anybody cares. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It originally said by Jefferson, we hold these truths sacred and undeniable. I kind of like that. That's pretty good, actually. Which signer was only 26 years old? Who? Someone said it, I think. Edward Rutledge. Couple more. How many men actually signed the Declaration?
56.
Yeah. Which state was the first to instruct its delegates to vote for it? Virginia? Yeah. How many times, Darren, you have a 0%. You're at the 0. How many times does the word independence appear in the text? In the Declaration? Anybody know?
0.
0 is the correct answer. That's all for the fun questions. Do you have the video?
Yeah.
All right. Are there any questions you guys have? Maybe I'll have the answer? Sure. Hold on, Sean. Yeah.
You know, I always found it interesting that the colonists were, in my opinion anyway, the colonists were really saying, wait a minute, we still consider ourselves subjects of and citizens of Great Britain, but we're not given the same rights as other British citizens. Especially when you brought up the whole issue of taxation without representation. Let's not forget that Parliament, by the 1300s, was comprised of both the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Commons, by 1414, had gained the right from the king to have a definite say and approval of anything that was passed by the Parliament's legislature. The colonists were denied that. So really,
Stand up.
I as if I've never heard that one before. What I was saying is, the colonists were really saying what really was not happening is we're not being given the same rights as the rest of British citizens, because they did not have the same say that the common person had through the House of Commons in Parliament. When they were given the taxes, when they were given the different acts that were punitive against them, they didn't have any say that the regular British citizen would. And this is really what they were protesting when they were writing these declarations of independence. They were not given the same type of right that they had if they had been living over in Great Britain, because they didn't have any representation within Parliament. And this is what they were looking for. When they couldn't receive it, they wanted to declare their independence.
Anyone else?
So, what, obviously, like, right in the first line is, in its Declaration of the 13 United States of America. United is not capitalized. Did they have an idea of what they wanted their independent country to be called?
I don't know that answer. But it's kind of, I'm guessing, you could guess that it came from something like that, right?
Right, like it says
Independent.
United States of America, but they capitalized States and America. I don't know if they thought States of America was
Yeah.
what they were going for, or.
That's for one of the next few topics, for sure. Yes?
Legally, a state has some authority, has some power. A colony is still subject to the rule of the overlord, and therefore doesn't have a separate existence from the overlord. So by them saying in the Declaration of Independence, these are the states, they were thereby declaring their independence from the overlord.
Ew.
That's
Right. That's right.
There you go.
You have something? Yeah?
The people in Great Britain at the time were also subject to all these taxes, and they were unhappy also. But because they believed in the king, that their superior, they were forced to accept their unhappiness and be happy about it.
You remember that, Augie?
Well, I
Well,
spent,
but the key difference, Augie, is they had some form of
they
representation.
did, but their representation was still controlled by Parliament and the king.
Like ours is controlled by the Democrats.
Well, exactly.
Gary?
I mean, a lot of times,
Sounded like he was explaining marriage a little bit.
Doesn't mean you're gonna be happy about it.
I didn't even know he was legal.
unfortunately, the Democrats don't realize why this country was founded.
So, I do, this was, there's no battles, the only reference to fighting was the bullets that we made out of King George III statue. I would like to trace those back, where they went. That would be an interesting project, to see if they went to a specific militia or something like that, and what that militia ended up doing. That would be interesting to learn. But we did it. We declared it, Gary. Yes, we did. And hopefully now you know a little bit more about why we did it, instead of just being told, we declared independence for this, that, and the other thing. There were a lot of things happening. And you got to kind of place yourself back at that time of what they were experiencing. And the most important thing, which is what you mentioned, Jim, we were British at the time. We were subject, so we were coming from that vantage point and saying we're being treated very unfairly. Anything else? Rick, you have anything?
The detail, go ahead.
I'm curious about something. You said Adams defended Jefferson during the debates, right?
Yeah.
Why? So this was later on, but what led to them becoming political enemies?
Jefferson was, today's world, Jefferson would be a Republican. Adams would be a Democrat, probably, today. He was much more, Jefferson was much more individual rights. Adams was, he believed in individual rights, but he also, kind of like Washington, actually believed in a stronger central presence.
Jefferson wanted
Who
to
knows
solve-
that? Who knows what caused the rift between Adams and Jefferson? Because it was quite large, and they were going at it under different pseudonyms. And newspapers, going at each other. I have not yet studied that stuff, so I'm just guessing.
I know Jefferson was in favor of a small central government, just a few departments.
Yes,
Okay, where Adams probably was wanted, like you said, a Democrat, more of a wide-based, central government. Jefferson also believed in states' rights. He believed states should have more power, based on their own individual state, as opposed to the entire, as a government as a whole.
The central bank was a big part of that too, having a Federal Reserve.
That was Hamilton.
That was Hamilton and Jefferson. It was like the anti-federalists and.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Adams more so sided with Hamilton on
a
that.
lot of those battles continued for years up until the Constitution, actually. A lot of the compromises in the Constitution were because of those differences. You know, where the states' rights versus central organization, that kind of stuff.
Really where the reserve powers came from, where the Constitution had to have the amendment that talked about the reserve rights.
Yeah.
That was part of that whole argument.
Anybody else? Paul?
Didn't one of them draft the Federalist Papers that lobbied for, I don't remember, it was either states' rights or stronger central government?
Adams.
I thought the Federalist Papers were a conglomeration of the back and forth in the papers.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So
Hamilton and Madison, right?
Hamilton was involved, and Adams,
Madison.
and Madison. Was Jefferson in there?
I don't think so.
I don't
I don't
believe
think
so.
it was. Well, so it was the back and forth that happened in the papers under the pseudonyms is what the Federalist Papers were.
But what were they accomplishing with the Federalist?
So they were trying to describe the Constitution, I believe, in a way that people could understand it, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, some of it was the way they, each person's view of.
Yeah, they wanted the Constitution to be ratified.
James Madison wrote most of the Constitution. He was a brilliant man. He studied very.
Yeah, he was very young during the Declaration, too. Anyone else?
Who did you say, wanted to introduce that change of law with slavery?
Initially Franklin, behind closed doors.
Is that when they, at the Battle of
Not the
Bunker
law,
Hill?
but to take it out.
Oh, okay.
Um,
And then he promised them if
I'm sorry, Lord Dunmore was
Okay.
a British lord that issued a proclamation saying that if, in 1775, that whatever enslaved person wants to join us fighting, they will get their freedom
Okay.
for doing so.
And then at the end of Bunker Hill or whatever, the colonists, the white colonists said to the black guy, I'm proud to have you standing by my side. Because he fought how many days or whatever he fought, how many months
Yeah,
he fought with them, right?
yeah.
That was in the Patriot.
To give him his, right, to
Yeah.
give him his freedom, right?
Correct.
So, okay. Thank you.
Jefferson was strongly opposed to the slavery at that point. He wanted no slavery included in the Declaration of Independence, and that was vetoed.
And what year was
Because
that?
the southern colonies didn't go along with it.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was saying.
Correct.
He was, people say that was his biggest
Regret.
regret, having that pulled out.
He also didn't get rid of the slaves though.
What was that,
He
August?
did not get rid of his slave or his,
No, he did not.
or his girlfriend.
Sally.
You know,
And that was in August of '76?
Sally Hemings.
that was in July. That was part of the Declaration.
Oh, okay.
So remember, Jefferson actually wrote in the initial draft condemning the king for perpetuating slavery.
Well, when did he,
That was pulled out.
when the colonists came to fight, the black colonists came to fight, didn't he promise them at the beginning of that, if you fight for so many months, when was that?
That was the British.
That was the
Oh,
British.
British promise, okay.
They did that beforehand in
70,
1775.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they were saying in the Declaration, was you're even putting our own people against each other.
Right,
So,
thank you.
I'm going to talk about battlefield medicine. We all hear about battles, how many men died, how many men were wounded. but we really don't know how they were cared for. And back in the days of the Revolutionary War, we didn't have many doctors in these colonies, and most of them weren't formally trained.
Hold the microphone closer here.
So most of them weren't formally trained. So if you wanted to be a doctor, let's say someone like him, who would never pass the board exam to get in,
I fixed you up, Louis.
you could go to your barber and apprentice with him, because barbers had sharp tools and they were usually the doctors. Or the few that were in the colonies, you could go ask them to be their apprentice, and you would pay them for several years and you would become a doctor. So this is how they became doctors. Now, when we had the Battle of Bunker Hill, there were no doctors that followed the battles. Not like we have today. We have corpsmen, medics. They didn't have that back then. All they had were some townspeople, a barber. But as Washington took over, one of his first things he did was he needed medical attention for his men. So who does he get? He gets Benjamin Church. And what's Benjamin Church turned out to be? A traitor. He claimed his innocence, but he was the first Surgeon General. He lasted 3 months. And once he was caught, because they intercepted some of his letters going to General Gage in England, he denied it. They imprisoned him, and they sent him to the West Indies. That ship never made it. They don't know what happened to him after that. So that was our first Surgeon General. But what he did do was he got 1,400 doctors to tend to our troops. 65% of these doctors died of diseases. Now, when you were on the battlefield and you got wounded, you could be there for 3 days. There weren't medics, corpsmen to come get you. The battle would be over, and whoever was left from that battle would scour the fields that you're on, drag you back to a medical tent. And in this tent were doctors. So who could tell me what kind of anesthetic they used in those days?
Whiskey.
Coach.
That's one.
Opium.
Opium was another. Okay? That's all you had. The third was a wooden stick wrapped in a bandage.
Your cane?
That could be right up here. Okay? So they wrapped the wooden stick, stick it in your mouth, or a piece of leather. The diseases that many of these men died from: malaria, smallpox, typhus, diarrhea. These men died. There were 7,000 deaths in the Revolutionary War caused by, initial deaths on the field. 17,000 wounded died from disease. Okay? Even though you had medical attention, doesn't mean you were going to survive. So let's talk about how they did smallpox. They were inoculated. Does anyone know how they were inoculated in those days?
Pus of the dead, or is it put in your?
They would go certain kind of pus. You couldn't take the oldest pus, because if you got it, you would get infected. So they had to pick out the certain smallpox that you could have. They would cut it open, get a little pus, they'd cut your arm open, put it in, and then bandage your arm. That was inoculation back then. Okay? It didn't stop you from getting it. You could still get it, but the effects wouldn't be as bad. Okay? So now you get wounded. What did they use to fight infection? Honey, grease, alcohol. If you got wounded, you put honey on you, or they would throw some alcohol on it. But the surgeries, I think we have some pictures of this, of the tools and stuff.
Tools are up right now.
Okay. These are the tools that your doctor would use. And most of the time, you got hit with the musket ball, it shattered your bone. Of course, they were dirty, you get infected, you're laying in the battlefield for 3 days. Now they get to your leg or your arm, what sets in? Gangrene. They can't repair a broken bone like they done today, put plates in it, you're getting it cut off. So what they do is they get the longest, sharpest knife they got. Most people think you got the saw and you just hacked. No. What they did is they went above the wound, or the part they were going to cut off, bandaged around it because they needed a marker. And then they went below and bandaged it off so they could find out where they're going to cut. They make a horizontal incision. They get a piece of leather with a notch for your bone, stick it in, slide it back. So your skin, your tendons, your blood vessels are pushed back, leaving only the bone. Then you get the hacksaw. They call it a hacksaw. Then they cut your bone. Now remember, no anesthetic, you're biting down. If you were lucky, you passed out. Then they would let that leather piece go. And what was left, they'd sew it in. But first, they would get a tool that had a hook on it. They'd get the 5 or 6 blood vessels and stitch it up. Now, these weren't stitches like today. They were just hoping to. And then they flip the flaps of the skin over and stitch it up, throw some honey, whatever antiseptic they could put on it. Then they bandage you in linen. They didn't have gauze, it was linen. Okay? Now, most of these surgeons, they weren't sterile. They had a basin of hot water, stick their hand in, go to the next guy, stick their hand, go to the next guy. But this is how these battlefield doctors worked. They were brought to a tent, the tent would follow them. But also, you gotta remember, these surgeons fought in the battle as well. Dr. Joseph Warren, he fought, and let me get this. Warren fought, he died in battle. Yeah, I know that. Excuse me for 1 second. Get old, you forget. So he got it. Well, his name escapes me right now. But he fought, he lost, there was another doctor. He also fought. So these guys lost their lives in battle as well. Now, today there's the VA, you have benefits. What kind of benefits do you think Minutemen got if they died?
None.
0. Now you gotta remember, they had wives, small kids at home. What happened to their farms? Gone. Anything they worked for? Gone. So these women would have to go to churches, and hopefully these churches in the community would help them survive. Some did not. But if you were an officer and you got killed, you got 7 years of his salary, and that was it. Then, 50 years later, the government finally passed, we're going to give the Revolutionary War soldiers benefits. If you can prove you fought in the war, okay? They didn't take records. You had to prove that you fought in that battle.
When was that? Was that 50 years after?
50 years after.
So 1820s?
1825, and then the rule. So by the time they passed these, most of them were dead. So they really, we're not talking, they didn't even get their salary. You might be talking $1. So these soldiers were not treated very well after the war was over. And whatever they had, if they died, their families lost. So battlefield, and the most advances in medical technology today are made where? On the battlefield. That's where, because doctors have to get innovative, they have to try things, they're not restricted, but they're trying to save your life. So actually there were a lot of innovations that did come from the Revolutionary War, such as how they did amputations, the inoculation of smallpox. Sometimes they treated you with bloodletting. They cut you open, let you bleed. Or they get these things called rush pills. Anybody tell me what a rush pill is?
Mercury.
Mercury covered in beeswax. You swallow it, what does it do? Gives you diarrhea. And they hope you would get rid of your infection that way or disease that way. And with that, we go on into the Civil War. So you gotta remember, opium was the key. But they didn't have it. Where would they get opium from? Who was growing opium here in those days? Nobody. So a lot of that stuff came from England. Of course, we're fighting with them, so we're not getting it. Does anyone, so that's a quick overview of battlefield medicine during the Revolutionary War. Anybody, we have a short video of it. Jim.
One of the main things to remember is that back then, they didn't have any germ theory. They didn't realize that diseases and infections were caused by germs. That really didn't become any type of a current theory until the later 1800s. And, one of the first, that's how we developed Listerine. Dr. Lister came to the realization that by using various herbal components, it would sterilize sterilize the hands, would sterilize the surgical instruments. It could be put on the wound and kill the germs. Before that, there was no germ theory. They felt that diseases were caused either by bad air or an imbalance in what they called the body humors, the different liquids that would be found in the body, which is why they did bloodletting. They felt they were getting rid of bad humors in the body and trying to rebalance the humor system within the body, taking the mercury. Of course, the mercury would build up in the body and create a deadly poison. It's a heavy metal. Mercury was a basis for most of the medical compounds that they would use as medicine, as was arsenic. Those two things would build up in the body and kill the person who was being treated. So until they finally developed a theory of germs and germs passing along disease, they really didn't have any idea of what was being transmitted when the doctors would go from patient to patient with bloody or dirty hands and use instruments that hadn't been sterilized at all. You were passing along the infections and the other diseases. The doctors themselves, he said 65% of the doctors died of diseases. They were catching the diseases from the patients.
Right. But you also got to remember, we didn't have nurses. Once you were done in surgery, they threw you on a cot and let you lay there and let you recover. There weren't nurses or doctors going around to check on you. Here you go. There might be your buddy giving you some whiskey, just trying to make you ease that pain. Okay. But as we progress through the wars, we obviously see more advancements is going on. But that's how it was in the Revolutionary War day. Sometimes you think you'd rather be shot and killed than to go through that amputation. So are any other questions? Okay, appreciate you listening.
Thanks, Lou.
Thanks. Oh yeah, we have a short video. So Paul, pay attention when we get your medical degree.
Maybe.
You want to be a gynecologist.
Welcome to George Washington's Mount Vernon, which is owned and operated by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association.
It's Revolutionary War weekend here at Mount Vernon, and we're going to be taking a look at some 18th century medicine.
So join us for another lesson on the road.
This is going to be great, guys.
So today we take for granted the field of modern medicine with a wide array of medical procedures and drugs to treat a myriad of illnesses. But in the 1700s, training for doctors and medicines was very different.
The Revolutionary War had a huge impact on medicine in the 18th century. You know, there were over 7,000 people that were killed in the Revolutionary War in the battlefield, but far more were killed by disease. Almost 17,000 soldiers died of infectious diseases.
Soldiers living in close quarters, coupled with poor nutrition, cause diseases such as dysentery, fever, and diarrhea to spread throughout the armies. Additionally, the American colonies were going through the midst of a smallpox epidemic during the Revolutionary War. To better explain smallpox inoculation, here's Mrs. B.
Hey Paul, what are you doing?
I saw some ice here. I thought somebody might slip and fall.
Who was that?
Good catch. Safety first.
Slip and fall.
Stupid commercials.
Here's Mrs. Beale.
Smallpox was a continual plague for the general population as well as both the British and the American Army. A process of variolation using a small matter of someone else's smallpox pustule to transmit a safer form of smallpox was widely used. Very dangerous to use the proper kind of smallpox pus. You would never want to take it from a full-blown case of smallpox with huge pustules. This system, this box, and these tools were developed by physicians and manufactured by the Wellcome Institute in London as a teaching tool for physicians so that they would know what amount of matter and what stage of smallpox you wanted to take the pus from. And then using a lancet, you would drain the pustule into either a small vial or sometimes into a walnut shell, and then using either, again, the lance to cut your patient that you want to inoculate, put just a tiny amount of matter there and then wrap it up well. The other method, which was called the Spanish method, would take a small curved needle with a thread and drag it through the matter in the walnut shell and then go through a small amount of skin. This way you could safely inoculate your patient without much difficulty at all. In the towns, there was a long process of preparing patients, a series of diets to bring them to a low condition so that they could better receive the inoculation. But in the armies, one fast inoculation was all that we did. You would still get smallpox, but hopefully you would get a much milder variation and you would be well safe.
So Mr. Gimby and I are standing here right now with Dr. Grimes, who is a surgeon in the British military during the Revolutionary War. And so I have to ask you, sir, what was the qualification of being a surgeon in the military?
Qualification, really, most of your surgeons that you saw in the military, they had received some training. Many of them had actually apprenticed under other surgeons. In this period of time, your university training, the basis of it would be what we would call liberal arts. You would learn to speak in all the different languages and read, because most of our medical texts, especially when you just see the pharmaceutical side of things, they're in Latin. There's so much of this is in Latin, so you have to know those sorts of things. So that gives you an idea.
So during the Revolutionary War, did you tend to treat more wounds or more disease?
Immediately after a battle, of course, I'm going to say that it would be wounds. But for the most part, only about 5% of my time was spent dealing with wounds, dealing with amputations, which would be the primary surgery, or a trephination, where I would actually drill in someone's skull that received a head injury, that sort of thing. So the majority of, I'm saying 5% of my time in the surgery overall, 95% of it was based in taking care of soldiers who had various illnesses and diseases. So that's where I spent most of my time.
Well, what about Mr. Gimby here? Is there something you can do for him?
Interesting enough, Mr. Gimby, now, depends on the situation. Did you have a compound fracture, sir?
No, sir.
No, sir. Okay. If it's not a compound fracture, we would set it. We would literally set it, and we didn't make plaster cast at this time, but we had sometimes leather braces, or we would use pieces of wood and set and stabilize it just like it's being done now. Now, if it were a compound fracture, or say he had been struck by a bullet and it would have shattered the bone, 9 times out of 10, actually more like 9.9 times out of 10, I would amputate. Amputation should take a good surgeon about 3 minutes.
Okay.
There is no anesthesia. Now, I would give you this to bite upon, and I would let you that way. There is something we see in the movies with the idea of biting the bullet. It's falsehood, folks. It didn't happen. Generally, we would give them a piece of leather, maybe a stick wrapped in cloth like this that you put in the mouth, because the instant I take a sharp knife such as this capital knife and I start cutting on the patient, what are you going to do? You're going to holler, aren't you? If you have a bullet in your mouth, what's going to happen? Bingo! Then I'm running, if it goes down if it goes down the esophagus, we're okay. But if it goes in the other direction, we really have a problem.
It's a bad day.
Yes. I just make you comfortable and say, next. But what I would do, you would be usually prone. Sometimes I would actually sit you in a chair. I've done many amputations sitting in chairs. But you would have this so that when you did scream out, you would not swallow, okay? It would just cradle there.
Okay, so we know what you did with this, but are you able to walk us through
Let's
the
walk
rest
through
of these?
amputation. Let's walk through amputation.
Walking through an amputation.
What we'd be looking at is I'd either put the patient on a table or I'd put him in a chair.
Wait, put Mr. Gibby on the table?
No, I'm not going to put Mr. Gibby on the table. What we would do is we would we'd have the tourniquet usually already applied. Now, a tourniquet either would be the screw-type petted tourniquet, which I'm holding here, or it would be something that a lot of Boy Scouts might remember, which would be your stick and fillet, where you would take and put this on the patient, and you would literally keep turning with the stick until it tightened down and helped control the blood flow. Of course, neither one, the petted tourniquet would come the closest of really pretty well stopping the blood flow. Here's the example of a petted tourniquet. It actually has a buckle where I would shorten it and then I would start screwing, and it would actually put pressure. Actually, and if you look at modern tourniquets, they're not much different than this. So you would, once the blood flow is controlled, because there's the two big problems, and this is even present in the modern day era in military medicine. The two big problems we have is blood flow or blood, you bleeding out. The other one is infection. So we want to do things as quick as possible. Now, also in this age, it's anesthesia. We don't get anesthesia until the 1840s. So up until then, you are wide awake. And in fact, I prefer you to be wide awake so that you are able to control yourself. You understand? You're a gentleman. So conduct yourself as a gentleman. Pain is part of life. Today we say, give me a pill. Back in this period, that wouldn't be necessarily what would happen. So,
if you only list your vacation home on Airbnb, you'll get a couple who'll stay a couple of nights.
what would happen? So, you're on board. We've put you on the table. We've got the tourniquet screwed down. We're cutting off your arm. I'm going to go a hand's breadth above your injury, especially, and if it's in the joint, I'm going to stay away from the joint. I'm going to go a hand's breadth above. A lot of times I'll even take a piece of a cloth and tie it to kind of give me a marker. I would then start making my incision. Now, this is another Hollywoodism. You see them immediately introduce taking the capital saw to make the first cut. That wouldn't happen. You're tearing flesh. That's no more than, well, it has the teeth like a modern steak knife. So you're tearing. I want this to be quick and smooth, because think about this. Anytime you've cut yourself with a sharp knife, do you even realize it in the beginning? No, because it's so quick and if that's a good sharp knife, you don't feel it till a couple of seconds after. So this is going to be extremely sharp. We're going to do a circular cut all the way around. Some people refer to it as a guillotine cut. You're going to go to the bone. There are different surgeons. They may do it in different layers, do the skin and then do the muscle. But once you did that, we cut to the bone. At that point, I'd have an assistant take this device. This is called a retractor. You could do this also with just a bandage, but you would pull this into the actual cut, in the actual bone. So imagine this stick being the bone. I'm going to pull it into the skin so the bone notches. And then we're going to retract the flesh. We're going to pull up the flesh, the muscle, all that tissue, so that I'm going to actually literally cut further up the bone than where my initial cut was. That way, we pull the retractor off and the muscle and the skin and everything goes back into place. You're actually going to be able to make a stump and actually cover the end of the bone. You don't want the bone protruding. It would be a source of irritation, infection, and also would attract some things you don't want to attract. Once we have accomplished that, I will loosen the tourniquet Connecticut, and I will take this, and this is called a teneculum. We will literally reach in, I will pull out the 4 to 5 major blood vessels, and I will literally ligature them or tie them off using silk thread or linen thread. I will then pack them into the wound, bandage it up, and we will then send you away to recovery in modern day terms. But here's the good thing. Even in this period of no anesthesia, no antibiotics, if I cut anywhere mid-arm or below, mid-thigh and below, you're looking at about a 75, and some numbers even as high as 80% survival rate.
So you're gonna give Mr. Gimme a good prognosis there?
Yeah, actually I will, because whoever his physician is, or has provided good care, they've stabilized the injury, and hopefully you will be able to heal and have some use of your arm.
And I drove here today next to him, and he doesn't smell bad. Well, thank you very much, sir.
You're very welcome.
We thank you for your time.
And I hope your arm heals well. Yes.
All right, you have a wonderful day.
You have a great day and enjoy Mount Vernon.
All right, thank you. Thank you for taking a look at Revolutionary War and 18th century medicine with us. Next time you're in Northern Virginia and looking for something a little bit historical,
A bit scientific and all around nerdy.
come check out George Washington's Mount Vernon. That's Mr. Graham.
And that's Mr. Gimby. That's Mr. Ray.
We'll see you guys.
Okay, everybody, that's it for today. Thank you. A lot of you after the last session volunteered to do some a session of your own. That's fantastic. To contact each of you separately. Some of you already sent back like an outline. We'll incorporate them into our things that are coming up next. Next week is Battle of Long Island. That's a good one. That's a good one. And then we'll just start adding some of these other things. If you have any ideas yourself of some topics that you want to talk about, make sure you come to myself or Sean or Polly and let us know, and we'll add you in. It could be about a specific person, could be about a specific event, could be about general thing like the spy network. I know Polly's excited about that. Yes?
There's a series on Netflix called Turn. It's
Yes.
about the Revolutionary
The
War.
spies, yeah.
A lot of it is historical and some of it is fiction. But it really gives you a good idea as to how the wounded were treated, how the network of spies were created, and got information spread out without the British knowing.
Is that on Netflix now?
It's on Netflix.
So Turn. You're gonna want to watch Turn, especially when we announce the when we do that spy network.
And they're doing the Battle of Long Island currently on series 2.
Okay.
The barmaid's hot too.
Yeah, the barmaid was a hot topic.
Billy, you want to do a topic? No? All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.